The story opens with a woman kneeling before a statue of Buddha, deep in prayer, begging the heavens for forgiveness. Flashback 25 years. Desperate and cornered. A father nearly sold his own daughter to the wealthy Pa Bun family as a servant. That girl was Dawn. But fate played a cruel trick. Dawn caught the eye of both the master of the house and his eldest son, Tun. Since they were the same age, Dawn and Tun fell deeply in love. However, their romance hit a stone wall. Madame Nu, the first wife, she furiously opposed the relationship. Tun, being spineless and weak-willed, agreed to an arranged marriage just to keep Dawn in the household. This betrayal broke Dawn's heart, but Madame Nu wasn't finished. She verbally abused Dawn, physically attacked her, and humiliated her relentlessly. Pushed to the brink, Dawn decided to fight back. She pulled off a stunning power move. She seduced the master and rose to the top, becoming the second wife of the estate. The angrier Madame Nu got, the more satisfied Dawn felt. Dawn played the victim perfectly, apologizing with her lips but taunting Nu with her eyes. When Nu tried to expose her two-faced nature, both the master and Tun defended Dawn. Dropping the act, Dawn coldly whispered to Nu, "If you had accepted me as a daughter-in-law back then, I would have been obedient. You brought this on yourself." Realizing she had been outplayed, Nu stood frozen. Seeing the master approach, Dawn suddenly threw herself into the bushes, weeping and fake accusing Nu of pushing her. Nu was left speechless watching her rival win. 25 years have passed. Dawn and the master now have 3 children. During the lavish wedding of their second son, Rat, tragedy unfolds elsewhere. In a dark corner of Bangkok, a mute girl named Bai tries to protect her aunt from an abusive husband, only to be targeted by the aunt's drunken son. He drags the helpless girl into the woods to assault her. Meanwhile, back at the mansion, the wedding ends. The third son, Dom, steps out and meets a beautiful girl. Sparks fly immediately. When a feather falls from her hair, Dom gallantly picks it up. But this act of kindness turns into a nightmare. Dom suffers from a severe psychological disorder. Touching anything soft sends him into a violent, uncontrollable rage. The moment he touches the feather, he snaps. He brutally attacks the girl, destroying her beautiful face. Hearing the commotion, the family rushes out. Dawn throws herself in to stop her son, but in his frenzy, Dom shoves her aside. She crashes into a metal chair, blood pooling around her on the ground. The woman who spent a lifetime calculating and fighting for power now lies bleeding, helpless to stop the son she raised from destroying an innocent life. Madame Nu, the first wife, finally found an opportunity to mock Dawn after years of holding back. But she underestimated her rival. Dawn didn't back down an inch, clapping back at every insult. The argument escalated into a physical struggle until the master arrived just in time to stop the chaos. He scolded them both for acting like children and ruining the peace of the house. He ordered his son Tun to escort his mother, Madame Nu, away. However, Tun showed a lingering, suspicious amount of care for Dawn, his stepmother and former lover. This did not go unnoticed by Sa, Tun's wife, who began to sense that something was wrong between them. To protect the family reputation after Dom's violent outburst, the master sent Dawn to the victim's house with a large sum of hush money. At first, the victim's mother refused, coldly stating that money couldn't fix her daughter's trauma. However, Dawn, a master manipulator, convinced the woman that taking the money and moving far away was the only way for them to start over. The matter was settled in the shadows. On her way back, Dawn literally ran into Bai, the mute girl who was fleeing for her life. Bai had just escaped an assault attempt by her aunt's drunken son. Later, Dawn went to the temple to pray, maintaining her facade of a pious woman. There, she ran into her in-laws, who were fishing for gossip about Dom's violent episode. Dawn denied everything with a straight face. When they pointed out bloodstains on her clothes from the collision with Bai, Dawn quickly lied, claiming she had stopped to help an injured stranger, painting herself as a hero. Dawn, the woman who preaches morality while hiding a dark heart, saw an opportunity in the desperate, mute girl. She decided to buy Bai. Dawn framed it as an act of charity to save a poor girl, but her true motive was selfish. She needed a wife for Dom. Her daughter, Rin, had worried that no woman would ever accept Dom's split personality and violent tendencies. But Dawn had found a solution. She approached Bai and her aunt. Seeing Bai had nowhere to go, Dawn offered her a home. Bai, terrified of returning to her abusive cousin, hesitated. Her aunt urged her to go for her own safety. When Bai asked what her role would be, Dawn dropped the bomb. "You will be my daughter-in-law." With a stack of cash handed to the aunt as compensation, the deal was done. Bai, thinking she was escaping hell, unknowingly walked into a trap. She moved into the mansion, unaware of the nightmare waiting for her. That very night, Dom crossed paths with his future bride, Bai. While Dom felt himself falling head over heels all over again, Bai, overwhelmed and unprepared, bolted to her room. Confused by the cold shoulder, Dom went straight to his mother. Dawn was initially worried her son wouldn't accept a purchased bride, but to her surprise, Dom was ecstatic. He was ready to profess his love right then and there. However, Dawn dropped a bombshell. Bai was mute. Dawn's heart raced. She was terrified that if Bai discovered the truth about Dom's violent triggers, she would flee. To prevent this, Dawn assigned her daughter, Rin, to be Bai's constant shadow under the guise of taking care of her. The inheritance war word of Dom's upcoming marriage to a mute girl reached Madame Nu, who saw it as the ultimate punchline. She rushed to Dawn to mock her, expecting her rival to be humiliated. But Dawn didn't flinch. With a chillingly calm voice, Dawn fired back, "You have one son. I have 3. And soon I'll have grandchildren. Who do you think the master will leave the fortune to?" Realizing she was losing the numbers game, a panicked Madame Nu ran to the master, demanding he settle the inheritance now. It backfired spectacularly. The master, annoyed and offended, snapped at her. "I'm not dead yet. Are you cursing me?" His resentment toward his first wife only grew deeper. The lamb to the slaughter. Meanwhile, Dawn continued her perfect mother act. She officially introduced Bai to the master, who was instantly charmed by her gentle nature. But not everyone was happy. Nong, the second son's pregnant wife, watched Bai with pure venom. To her, another person in the house meant a smaller slice of the inheritance pie. Poor Bai, unaware of the vipers surrounding her, knelt before Buddha in tears of gratitude, believing she had finally found a safe haven. She had no idea that free lunches don't exist in this house. Behind closed doors, Don't True Face emerged. She didn't pity Bai. She chose her specifically because she couldn't speak. If Dom ever lost control and attacked her, Bai would have no way to scream for help or tell the master. The masterclass in manipulation. Despite her cruelty, Dawn still had one weakness. Tun, the first wife's son and her former flame. When Madame Nu caught Dawn staring longingly at Tun, she hit Dawn where it hurt, calling her an uneducated orphan and a bottom feeder trying to seduce her son. Dawn didn't use words this time. She delivered a lightning-fast kick to Nu's stomach, sending her to the floor, and followed up with a brutal beatdown. But the moment she heard Tun and the master approaching, Dawn flipped the script. When they burst into the room, they didn't see Dawn attacking Nu. They saw Nu pinning Dawn down. Dawn covered her bloody nose, weeping and framing Madame Nu for the entire fight. Once again, Nu was the villain in everyone's eyes. Even her own son, Tun, didn't believe her. Fuming and desperate for revenge, Madame Nu decided to strike where it hurt. She began spreading rumors all over town about Dom marrying a mute girl. Dawn had planned a quiet, private wedding to hide her son's secret, but thanks to Nu's big mouth, the entire city was now invited to the scandal of the year. The big day finally arrived. Dom looked the part of the perfect groom in his white suit, and Bai was breathtaking, her face glowing with hope for a new life. But amidst the celebration, Dawn watched from the shadows with a gaze as cold as ice. She knew the truth. Bai's survival of the wedding night wasn't a hope. It was a gamble against a fate already sealed. In the privacy of the bridal suite, the night began with a touch of romance. Dom gently stroked Bai's soft hair, leaning in to catch her scent. But the softness triggered his psychological demon. In a heartbeat, his face twisted into a mask of pure rage. He grabbed Bai by the hair and pinned her to the bed like a man possessed. Terrified and fighting for her life, Bai bit his hand with everything she had and bolted for the door. Before the wedding, Dawn had bought Bai's loyalty with expensive jewelry. Bai had been moved to tears, thinking her luck had finally changed. She didn't realize that the entire household was holding its breath, knowing that when Dom turned, he became a mindless, savage beast. Dawn found Bai hiding in the bushes, trembling like a wounded bird, her face covered in blood. Bai collapsed into Dawn's arms, sobbing. Playing the role of the saving angel, Dawn promised she was safe. She manipulated the girl into going back to the room, lying that Dom was gone and telling her she could simply lock herself inside for safety. Trusting her mother-in-law, Bai walked right back into the trap. The beast unleashed outside, the mansion was in chaos. Dom was roaming the halls like a mindless zombie, attacking anyone in his path. He pinned a male servant to the ground, strangling him until Dawn intervened. Dom was so far gone that he didn't even recognize his own mother, shoving her violently to the floor. He wasn't a man anymore. He was a wild animal. Seeing her son in a frenzy, Dawn made a chilling decision. She called out to Bai, who, trusting Dawn's word that she was alone, opened the door. Dawn immediately grabbed her, signaled the servants to bring Dom over, and shoved the beast and the lamb into the same room. Dawn slammed the door shut and ordered it to be locked from the outside. She had intentionally trapped a silent, defenseless girl in a room with a violent monster. This was why she had bought a mute girl, so that no matter what Dom did to her, there would be no screams to alert the master or the neighbors. Dawn then strictly ordered the servants to stay away and keep the secret from the master at all costs. Inside that locked room, the night was a living nightmare. When Dom finally regained consciousness the next morning, exhausted and surrounded by the wreckage of the room, the fog cleared. He realized he had suffered another episode. But as he looked around the ruined suite, Bai was gone. When it comes to pure, calculated cruelty, Dawn takes the crown. After the horrific events of the wedding night, she remained chillingly indifferent. Seeing Bai's broken body, she didn't flinch, merely telling her devastated son it's fine. She'll be okay once she wakes up. But Dom, unlike his mother, was consumed by a soul-crushing guilt. Unable to live with what he had done to Bai, he repeatedly smashed his head against the bed frame until he collapsed in a pool of blood. Don summoned a doctor, but when the professional warned her that Dom's psychosis was severe and he needed to be institutionalized, Don turned feral. She threatened to destroy the doctor's life if he ever breathed a word about her son's insanity. To Don, Dom isn't just a son. He is a pawn. She needs him at home to ensure she secures a larger share of the family inheritance, and she bought a mute girl specifically so the world would never hear the screams of his victims. Terrified for her life, Bai waited until her guards fell asleep to make a break for it. She fled into the night, only to collide with a man on a bicycle. It was Rat, the second son. He chased her down and caught her in his arms. As Bai struggled to break free, an unexpected and complicated spark of tension flared between them. Seeing the horrific bruises on her neck and arms, Rat's heart softened. In a rare moment of mercy in that house, he let her go. Bai ran back to her old neighborhood, hoping for sanctuary with her aunt. But she arrived to find only ashes. The house had been burnt to the ground. She was told that her aunt's abusive husband and son were dead, and the aunt herself had vanished. With no family and no home, Bai was truly alone. Back at the mansion, Dawn was in a murderous rage over Bai's disappearance. She brutally took her anger out on the servants, ordering them to flip the city upside down to find her property. Exhausted and broken, Bai eventually collapsed and fell into a deep sleep in a secluded alleyway. She was so drained she didn't hear the sound of approaching footsteps. A pair of bare feet moved slowly toward her sleeping form. A new danger, perhaps even more terrifying than the house she just fled, was closing in. Seeking refuge in a temple, Bai thought she had finally found peace. But in a cruel twist of fate, she ran straight into her mother-in-law, Dawn, who was there to put on her usual display of piety. The escape was over. Dawn dragged Bai back to the mansion and placed her under 24/7 surveillance. Internally, Dawn was livid. She viewed Bai as an ungrateful investment that was refusing to follow orders. However, Dawn didn't show her rage. Instead, she sat beside the trembling girl, putting on a sickening display of motherly concern. She stroked Bai's wounds, asking if they still hurt, only to follow up with a cold-blooded warning. Dom loves you. You're his wife now, and a little friction between a couple is normal. Don't run away again, Bai. If you stay and behave, life will be good. If you don't, I can't promise what will happen. To strip Bai of her last bit of dignity, Dawn reclaimed all the expensive jewelry she had gifted her. The princess was once again a prisoner. Traumatized and broken, Bai refused to eat or drink. Rin, Dawn's daughter, tried to offer some comfort, but her words only added to the horror. When Rin asked if Dom's violent episode was triggered by the feeling of Bai's soft hair, the realization shattered Bai. Desperate to stop being a trigger for the monster, Bai grabbed a knife to hack off her own hair. Rin stepped in to stop her, accidentally getting her hand sliced in the struggle. Rat, the second son, was deeply troubled by Bai's return. He visited her, but instead of offering an escape, he gave her a grim reality check. Stay here, he urged. Dom is terrifying when he loses control, but at least here you won't starve or be hunted on the streets. Here you have protection. For the first time, Bai's resolve began to waver. Was a life in a gilded cage with a monster better than a slow death in the gutter? Against Dawn's orders, Dom rushed to find Bai. But to her, he wasn't a repentant husband. He was the beast from her nightmares. She bolted her door, shaking with fear as Dom pounded on the wood, crying out explanations and begging for forgiveness. Dawn eventually pulled her son away, whispering that he needed to give his bride time. But in that house, time wasn't for healing. It was just another tool for Dawn to break Bai's spirit completely. Unbeknownst to Dawn, her time at the top was ticking away. The master's health was failing rapidly, and he had secretly drafted his final will. He tried to keep it a secret to avoid a civil war between his wives, but in a house this full of vipers, nothing stays hidden for long. A meddling relative caught wind of the news and ran straight to Dawn to stir the pot. Dawn played it cool on the outside, but inside her greed was burning. She was dying to know how much she and her rival would get. When Madame Nu tried to provoke her, Dawn didn't just stand there. She dismantled the first wife with surgical precision. Dawn smugly claimed that the master was leaving the entire estate to her son, Rat. When Nu called her a liar, Dawn laughed in her face. I share his bed every night, she boasted. I hear his secrets. I know exactly what's in that will. These words were a dagger to Nu's heart, leaving her shaking with rage. Dawn twisted the knife one last time. Don't waste your tears, Nu. At your age, crying doesn't make people pity you. It just makes you look pathetic. Driven to the brink, Madame Nu stormed off to confront the master. She attacked him with accusations and demands for a fair share, eventually getting into a physical scuffle. The stress was too much. The master clutched his chest and collapsed from a heart attack. At the hospital, Dawn and her children took their sweet time arriving. When she heard the master was in critical condition, a tiny dark smile flickered on Dawn's lips. She immediately played the green tea card, acting like a sweet, innocent victim. She loudly questioned what Madame Nu had said to murder the master with stress. Infuriated by the performance, Nu tried to slap the smug look off Dawn's face. Rat jumped in to protect his mother, and Dawn went into a full-blown dramatic act, wailing, clutching herself, and fake fainting onto the floor. The hallway became a circus of screams until Tun finally roared for everyone to shut up. Amidst the family chaos, Dom was spiraling. Terrified of losing his father and feeling completely helpless, he instinctively sought out Bai. Bai's heart skipped a beat when she saw him, and she reflexively backed away. But this time Dom didn't look like a monster. He looked broken. He bowed his head and apologized with such raw sincerity that Bai froze. She remembered Rin's words about how Dom's life was its own kind of prison. Pity began to replace her fear. Dom took her hand, weeping about his fear of his father dying and his terror that Bai would leave him. His vulnerability finally broke her. They shared a tentative embrace of reconciliation. That night the air grew cold. As they lay together, the tension was thick. Dom reached out to stroke Bai's face. His hand grazed her jawline, but then, as if hit by an electric shock, his fingers recoiled. He had accidentally brushed against her soft hair, the one thing that could turn the man she pitted back into the beast she feared. Bai felt her body begin to tremble, knowing that the nightmare was only one touch away from starting all over again. Every day, Dawn visits the temple to meditate and pray. To the outside world, she is the goddess of piety, praying for her sick husband's recovery. Everyone praises her beauty and her heart of gold. But behind closed eyes, Dawn isn't praying, she's counting. Every chant is a calculation of the massive inheritance she's about to inherit. Meanwhile, Madame Nu, the woman the master actually despises, is the only one truly shedding tears for him. The day finally comes. The master recovers and returns to the mansion. His arrival sparks an immediate tug-of-war between his two wives. But once again, Dawn's manipulation wins out, and the master chooses her side. Watching them walk away, Madame Nu is left shaking with rage. All her years of devotion and patience have been tossed aside like trash. In a total breakdown, Nu finally lets the mask of the dignified first wife slip. Sobbing to her daughter-in-law, she pours out decades of bitterness. How Dawn stole her husband, her status, and her happiness the very second she stepped foot in that house. The puppet master at work. Dawn's eyes are everywhere. When the master asks Bai how she's doing, Dawn shoots the mute girl a look so icy it makes her blood run cold. Bai quickly nods, terrified to show any sign of distress. Next, Dawn sets her sights on Tun, Madame Nu's son. Playing the concerned stepmother, she guilt-trips him. She argues that because Dom is mentally unstable, Tun, out of brotherly love, should forfeit his inheritance to his younger brother. She promises to take care of Tun's family in exchange. When Tun agrees, Dawn can barely hide her predatory grin. Late one night, Dawn stands before her mirror. She admires her youthful skin and vibrant beauty, then looks at her aging, frail husband. She feels a surge of self-pity, believing her beauty is wasted on an old man. Seeking air, she looks out the window and spots a prowler. She gathers her courage and heads downstairs, only to be grabbed from behind. After a struggle, the man pulls off his mask, revealing a rugged, fierce face. Dawn is stunned. The man slaps her, sending her to the ground. Dawn doesn't cower. She snaps back, striking him across the face repeatedly. But instead of getting angry, the man laughs. His name is Dot, an old blacksmith from 20 years ago who fled the city to keep a bone-chilling secret hidden. Now broke and desperate, he's back to demand his old job in the workshop. Terrified that he'll reveal the truth about her past, Dawn has no choice but to agree. Soon, Dot is back at the forge, his muscles rippling as he swings his hammer. Dawn watches him from a distance, her eyes glued to his body. No one knows the truth. Dot is Dawn's ex-lover. Dot is a master of his craft, but Dawn's son, Rat, is hesitant to hire him. Dot used to work for Madame Nu, and Rat fears his presence will start another war. But Dawn is adamant Dot stays. As she watches her old flame work, Dawn starts dreaming of a brighter future, completely unaware that she is inviting a wolf into her home. While Rat is buried in work at the forge, his pregnant wife, Nong, is at her breaking point. The moment he steps through the door, she starts nagging him, resentful that he spends all his time at the shop. Too exhausted to argue, Rat simply turns and walks away. But fate has other plans. No sooner has he left than Nong begins going into labor. Rat rushes back, only to run straight into his brother, Dom, who is in the middle of a violent psychotic break. Rat doesn't hesitate to get physical, landing several heavy blows to subdue his brother until Dom is knocked unconscious. Looking at the fainted Bai, Rat is overwhelmed by pity and helplessness. But there's no time to breathe. As he carries Bai to her room, a servant delivers the news. His wife is in labor. Rat has to sprint right back to the hospital. The shock of hearing about Dom's brutal attack on Bai is too much for the master. He collapses and is rushed into emergency surgery. Their daughter Rin prays fervently for his survival, but Dawn's eyes tell a different story. Behind her concerned mask, she is secretly hoping the old man finally kicks the bucket so she can claim the fortune. The miracle and the bombshell. Unfortunately for Dawn, her wish doesn't come true. Despite being on his last legs, the master pulls through. Just as Rat receives word that his wife and new baby girl are safe, he hurries home to a mansion buzzing with news. Not only has the master cheated death, but the doctor drops another bombshell. Bai is also pregnant. This wave of good news gives the master a new lease on life, but the mood soured the moment Madame New arrived. Her late appearance only fuels his disgust. He lashes out, ordering her to scram and demanding that only Dawn stay by his side. Humiliated and feeling slighted, New refuses to budge, and the tension in the room becomes suffocating. Caught in the crossfire, Tun hesitates before gently taking his mother's hand, pleading with her to walk away and end the exhausting confrontation. By day, Dawn is the picture of devotion, chanting prayers at the temple. The world sees a grieving wife, but behind closed eyes, Dawn is grinning. She's not praying for her husband's health, she's counting the millions she's about to inherit. And at night, while the master sleeps, her mind wanders not to her family, but to Dot, the rugged blacksmith from her past, clutching her sheets in a daydream of forbidden desire. Meanwhile, Bai, the mute girl who grew up with nothing, is finally expecting her first child. But there is no joy, only terror. She is trapped with a husband whose mind is a ticking time bomb. Every time Dom snaps, he turns violent. Bai is paralyzed by a double fear. For her own life, and the terrifying possibility that her baby will inherit either her silence or his madness. Dom tries to apologize when he's lucid, but the trauma is etched into Bai's very soul. She can't bring herself to forgive the monster under his skin. The first wife, Madame New, is spiraling. Finding out about Bai's pregnancy, she storms over to Dawn, barking threats about the inheritance. Dawn just smirks. The master already agreed to everything, she purrs. Aren't you a little late to the party? Losing her mind, New spits out a vile curse. I hope that brat is born just like its parents, crazy and mute. That was the final straw. The two women fly at each other in a literal hair-pulling match. New actually manages to pin Dawn down, raining blows upon her. Just then, Dawn spots Tun New's own son approaching. In a split second, she flips the switch. The warrior Dawn vanishes, replaced by a sobbing, broken victim. New, having been played twice before, tries to drag her up, but Dawn goes limp, refusing to move. When Tun bursts in, he sees his mother attacking a defenseless Dawn. Dawn seizes the moment, grabbing Tun's leg and begging for mercy while shooting a look of pure, icy triumph at New. Tun finally snaps at his own mother, ordering her to stop. New is shattered. Her own flesh and blood is choosing the enemy. As New leaves in tears, Dawn's eyes flutter open, her vulnerable act having ignited a fierce, protective instinct in Tun. He's now a pawn in her game and he doesn't even know it. Back in her room, Dawn's heart is black with vengeance. She vows that once the master is out of the way, she will make New pay for every slight she's endured. But she's still a mother. When she hears Dom hasn't eaten in 3 days, she softens. She holds him, whispering lies that Bai will never leave him because of the baby. In Dawn's world, a child is just another chain to keep people where she wants them. The master, sensing his end is near, pulls out the family's greatest treasure, a chest overflowing with dazzling diamonds. He entrusts it to Dawn, making her promise to hand it over to Bai when he's gone. Dawn nods and smiles, her voice dripping with sweet obedience. But as the light hits those jewels, the last shred of her promise evaporates. In her mind, Bai is an outsider, a servant who hit the lottery. Dawn has no intention of sharing a single stone. The diamonds are hers, and the war has only just begun. Dawn wastes no time cornering Bai, forcing her to forgive Dom for his violent outbursts. She cold-bloodedly uses Bai's unborn child as leverage. Do you really want your child to grow up without a father? She asks, her voice dripping with artificial concern. Bai can only weep in silence. Trapped between a manipulative mother-in-law and an unstable husband, Bai feels her spirit breaking. She is a prisoner in a house of mirrors with no escape in sight. The master finally sees through Dawn's saintly facade. He realizes she is the architect of the chaos in his home. But before he can expose her or change his will, the shock of the discovery sends him into a final critical collapse. From the shadows, the mute Bai witnesses it all. The truth, the lies, and the looming tragedy. Her future is now a dark question mark, drifting toward a destination she cannot see. The story then reveals a haunting secret from the past. When Dawn was pregnant with her third child, Dom, she didn't want him. She spent months taking drugs and trying every desperate method to terminate the pregnancy. She failed. Under the advice of a young monk, she finally gave birth to Dom. But Dom's stupid mistakes during the pregnancy left a permanent scar. Dom was born with a neurological disorder. This is why he snaps. The soft touch trigger was caused by the very drugs Dawn took to get rid of him. Now the entire household lives in constant fear. Even Dom's desire to hold his own newborn baby is a source of terror, as they fear he might lose control and kill the child. Feeling like a failure of a father, Dom retreats into his sorrow. Tun, the first wife's son, finds him and offers genuine comfort. It's a rare moment of brotherly love, but it's short-lived. Madame Nu, watching from the balcony, is blinded by rage at the sight of her son consorting with the enemy. She charges at Dom with a broomstick, viciously beating him in a fit of savage jealousy, screaming for him to stay away from Tun. The servants watch in horror, too terrified of Madame Nu's status to intervene. When the master hears of the assault, he is livid. He demands that Madame Nu apologize to Dom immediately. Madame Nu's pride is her armor. She refuses to budge. "I will never bow my head to the son of a mistress," she shrieks. Her defiance is the final straw for the master. Done with her bitterness, he orders his staff to take him away, leaving her behind in the other house. As the master's carriage pulls away, Madame Nu stands alone in the silence. Her tears fall for a life spent fighting a losing battle. In this massive estate surrounded by family, she has realized the most painful truth of all. She is the true outsider. The master woke up in the middle of the night, his mind heavy with worry and his throat parched. He reached for his young wife, but Dawn's side of the bed was cold. He began to wander the silent mansion, searching for her in the dark. Upstairs, the sound of her crying baby woke Bai. As she paced the balcony, she caught sight of two shadows moving suspiciously among the trees in the distance. Remembering that curiosity killed the cat, Bai forced herself to turn away. She didn't want any part of the family's dark secrets. But the master wasn't so lucky. He followed the shadows and saw exactly what Dawn was up to. The shock was like a physical blow to the chest. He was consumed by a sudden, agonizing regret, realizing too late that he had abandoned his loyal first wife for a woman who never loved him. The rage was too much for his weak heart. He collapsed on the spot. Hearing the thud, Bai rushed downstairs. She found the master unconscious but still breathing. She pleaded with Dawn to call for help, but Dawn stood there like a statue, her eyes cold. She was waiting for him to die. When Dawn realized he was still clinging to life, she moved in to finish him off herself, but she was too late. Bai had already managed to alert the servants. Dawn's murderous plan was thwarted, at least for the moment. After 3 days in the ICU, the master finally passed away. For Dawn, this was the moment she had spent decades waiting for. She was so thrilled she could barely keep from crying tears of joy. Standing before the mirror, she carefully wiped away her bright lipstick, adjusting her face into a mask of appropriate grief. In the other house, Madame Nu, the woman who had lived in lonely exile for years, did the opposite. She meticulously applied her makeup, choosing the look the master had loved most when they were young. It was her final act of dignity. At the funeral, Dawn took center stage for her best performance yet. She positioned herself where everyone could see her and staged a dramatic, grief-stricken fainting spell. While the guests whispered in sympathy for the poor widow, Madame Nu watched with icy contempt. Eventually, the sight of Dawn's fake tears pushed Nu over the edge. Nu snapped. She began screaming at Dawn, ready to expose her lies in front of the entire mourning crowd. But as Nu lunged at her, Dawn leaned in and whispered with chilling calm, "Keep going. The more you scream, the more they pity me and hate you." Nu froze, realizing she had walked right into another one of Dawn's traps. She had played the villain in Dawn's script once again. Then came the reading of the will, and it was a bloodbath. Madame Nu and her son were left with a few measly houses. Everything else, the entire family fortune and both massive factories, was left to Dawn's side of the family. Nu had spent her life building this empire alongside her husband, only to see it handed to the mistress on a silver platter. Desperate, Nu tried to fight for her son Tun's rights, only to be hit by the ultimate betrayal. Tun revealed he had already signed an agreement with Dawn to forfeit his inheritance. Devastated and ashamed of her own son's weakness, Nu delivered a sharp, stinging slap to Tun's face. Tun, humiliated and fuming, stormed out, leaving his mother alone to face the wreckage of her life while Dawn stood victorious over the master's grave. Tun, tired of the family's endless bloodbath, pays his respects at his father's grave. Dawn follows him, playing her favorite role, the supportive, grieving stepmother. Meanwhile, Madame Nu swallows her pride and apologizes to Tun. They reconcile, but a new storm is brewing. Sa, Tun's wife, finds a handkerchief that makes her heart stop. It's a piece of evidence that suggests a secret connection between her husband and Dawn. Sa confronts Dawn, warning the Black Widow to stay away from her man. Dawn doesn't even bother to deny it. Instead, she mocks Sa with chilling arrogance. "If your mother-in-law hadn't blocked me years ago, you wouldn't even be in this house. You're just a seat filler." Sa is humiliated and flees in tears. Dawn thinks she's won. She believes that now the master is gone, she can reclaim Tun. But she gets a painful reality check. Tun truly loves his wife Sa. To end the drama once and for all, Tun makes a bold move. He builds a literal wall between the two houses, physically cutting Dawn out of his life. Fuming, Dawn takes her rage out on her servants, but the queen has officially lost her influence over the first wife side of the family. Dawn's life has been a series of dirty tricks to climb the social ladder. She forced a mute girl to marry her unstable son and manipulated her husband to his grave. To hide her wealth from Madame Nu, Dawn buried a black fund of jewels in the backyard. But her past is catching up to her. Her ex-lover, Dot, is treating her like a personal ATM, constantly demanding hush money for her secrets. Meanwhile, her son Dom is a ticking time bomb. In a rare moment of lucidity, he tries to hold his child, only for his trigger to flip. He nearly kills his own baby in a fit of rage. Bai, now terrified of her own husband, pulls further away. Overwhelmed by guilt, Dom punishes himself physically. Dawn is heartbroken but can't fix him. In fact, Dom's condition is getting worse. He no longer needs to touch something soft to snap now. Just the sight of something soft sends him into a frenzy. Desperate for a win, Dawn decides to give some jewelry to her granddaughter. She goes to the backyard to dig up her hidden treasure box. When she opens it, her heart drops. The box is empty. Her loyal maid, Nguyen, had been watching her for years. Tired of being treated like trash, Nguyen stole every single diamond and vanished. Dawn is forced to swallow this bitter pill in silence. She can't report the theft without admitting she hid the money from the estate. Fast forward 6 years. Dom is a shell of a man, using ice-cold baths and physical restraint to keep his inner monster at bay. He longs to be a normal husband and father, but it's a pipe dream. For Bai, life is a living nightmare. Since losing her secret fortune, Dawn has become a penny pincher and a tyrant. She treats Bai like a slave, forcing her to do backbreaking laundry and housework all day after she drops her child off at school. But the real horror is still hidden. One night, Bai discovers the darkest secret of the mansion. Dawn hasn't just been caring for Dom. She has been keeping him in iron chains for 10 years to hide his condition from the world. The image of her husband chained like an animal haunts Bai, leaving her in a daze, unable to even focus on her own child. The perfect home Dawn built is finally starting to crumble from the inside out. The horror in the mansion reaches a new peak. Dom, losing all sense of reality, attempts to stomp on his own arm to suppress his violent urges. His young daughter, Bun, watches in confusion, asking what's wrong. In a split second, Dom snaps. He hurls his daughter aside and turns his rage on his mute wife, Bai, brutally beating her as their child screams for help. When the family rushes in, they find Bai unrecognizable from her injuries. Dom turns on his own mother, Dawn, and his brother, Rat, nearly strangling them both. In a desperate act of self-defense, Dawn smashes a vase over Dom's head to stop the carnage. When Dom wakes up the next morning, he feels a cold weight around his ankle. He is shackled to the floor like an animal. The realization of what he did to his family shatters his mind completely. He begs his mother to leave, screaming in despair. To protect the household, Dawn makes a chilling choice. She keeps her own son in iron chains for the next 10 years. A decade passes. Without her father's protection, Bun grows up in a living hell. She and her mute mother are treated worse than servants, forced to share a tiny, cramped bed while 100 rooms in the mansion sit empty. Determined to save her mother, Bun works hard to graduate, but life on the outside is just as cruel. One day, she is cornered by a gang of thugs. Just as things look hopeless, a young man in white intervenes. After a fierce brawl, Bun helps him drive the thugs away. At the hospital, they discover a shocking twist of fate. The man is Yue, the son of Tun. They are cousins who haven't seen each other since the wall was built between their houses years ago. Their happy reunion is short-lived. Tan, a jealous cousin, spots them together. Desperate to cause trouble, Tan runs to Dawn and snitches, spinning a lie about Bun's behavior. Dawn, ever the tyrant, delivers a brutal physical assault on Bun the moment she gets home. Tan gloats in the corner, satisfied with the chaos she's caused. The blacksmith and the maid news reaches the mansion that Tun is returning from abroad. Dawn's heart, cold for years, flutters at the thought of her old flame. She immediately loses interest in Dot, the blacksmith, and tries to cast him aside. But there are eyes everywhere. Lui, a housemaid, has been spying on them. She follows Dot into the woods and watches him hide a wooden box. When she later digs it up and finds it overflowing with gold, her shock turns to blinding rage. She realizes the pious Dawn has been hiding a fortune while treating the staff like dirt. Lui vows to expose the truth and destroy Dawn's reputation. Dawn remains oblivious to the storm brewing. While at a temple, she overhears a secret about a medicinal leaf that can cure mental illness. Desperate to help Dom, she heads to the market to find it. In the middle of the crowded street, Dawn accidentally drops an expensive ring. Before she can retrieve it, a public brawl breaks out. Emboldened by her secret knowledge and the stolen gold, dares to do the unthinkable. She publicly confronts her mistress, raising her hand against Dawn in front of the entire town. The hierarchy of the mansion is finally starting to shatter. The jewelry Dawn once gifted her secret lover, becomes the very evidence that threatens to destroy her. The maid, Luoy, tries to use the ring to expose Dawn's hypocrisy in front of a crowd, but Dawn is a master of manipulation. She flips the script, framing Luoy for a crime she didn't commit. As the mob turns on Luoy, Dawn plays the saintly mistress, stepping in to save her from the angry crowd. While the town praises Dawn's mercy, Luoy is left broken and sobbing on the ground, realizing she has been completely outplayed. But the nightmare is just beginning. Once they are alone, Dawn's mask slips. She finds and gives him a cold-blooded ultimatum. Silence Luo forever, or she'll take matters into her own hands. Who never truly cared for the maid, lures Luoy away and subjects her to a brutal ordeal, leaving her for dead and exhausted. The ghost in the room that night. Dawn wakes up to a chilling sight. Her bedroom door is wide open. From behind the screen, a battered and bloodied Luoy emerges like a vengeful ghost. She lunges at Dawn, pinning her down in a desperate attempt at revenge. Dawn's screams bring the mute Bai and her daughter Bun rushing in. They try to protect Dawn, but they are no match for the crazed Luoy. Finally, Rat bursts in and throws Luoy against the door with such force she has no choice but to flee into the night. Livid after the attack, Dawn hunts down and demands he finish the job. Before they can track Luoy down, the maid reappears in broad daylight, screaming to the world that Dawn and are having a scandalous affair. Chaos erupts. Grabs Luoy, trying to choke the life out of her. In a final act of defiance, Luoy bites him hard, her eyes filled with a terrifying resolve. She screams that she is taking them both down to hell with her. Driven into a blind rage by her provocations, loses all control. He grabs a weapon and delivers a series of fatal blows, leaving Luoy in a pool of blood. Believing Luoy is finally dead, the two conspirators scramble to cover their tracks. Flees to the factory to establish an alibi, while Dawn returns home to create a distraction. She begins a cruel, public disciplinary beating of the young Bun, making so much noise that the entire household is focused on her motherly rage rather than the murder happening elsewhere. The deathbed confession, but they underestimated Luoy's will to live. With her last bit of strength, the dying maid crawls through the dirt until she reaches Madame Nu, the first wife. With her final gasping breaths, Luoy exposes the truth about Dawn's affair and her crimes. Madame Nu screams for help, but by the time the rest of the family arrives, Luoy is gone. In Thai culture, the feet are considered the lowliest, dirtiest part of the body. In a final, chilling act of disrespect, Dawn blessed her own feet with water to mock the late Luoy. Madame Nu wasted no time calling the police to report Luoy's deathbed confession, but the law wasn't on her side. The investigators chalked it up to suicide. Since Luoy had a history of attacking Dawn and was known to be mentally unstable after a breakup, they dismissed Nu's claims as a bitter vendetta between rivals. The only person who truly knew the secret of the murder was Bai, but her silence didn't buy her any mercy. Dawn continued to treat her like a punching bag, viewing Bai as nothing more than a broken toy she had bought for her son. Now that Dawn was locked away, Bai had lost her utility in Dawn's eyes. Dawn decided to orchestrate a tragedy. She sent the guards away, unshackled Dom, and scattered feathers, his violent trigger, all over the room. She then ran to Bai, sobbing with fake news that Dom had died. In a panic, Bai rushed into the room. The moment she saw the broken chains and the feathers, she realized she had walked into a slaughterhouse. Before she could flee, the beast caught her. Dom dragged her back into the room by her hair, and the sounds of a brutal struggle echoed through the halls as Dawn waited outside with a smug grin. When the servants finally intervened, Dawn was actually disappointed. She looked at the bloodied Bai and coldly asked, "How are you still alive?" Yet, once they reached the hospital, Dawn flipped the script again, playing the doting, concerned mother-in-law in front of the doctors. While at the temple, Dawn ran into Nguyen, the maid who had stolen her secret black fund years ago. Nguyen was now a desperate debtor. Dawn cornered her, demanding her money back, only to find out that Nguyen had gambled every cent away. In a panic, Nguyen tried to flee and fell into a deep pond. Dawn watched her struggle for a moment, but the thought of her lost fortune hardened her heart. She stood on the bank, a cold-blooded bystander, and watched the ripples disappear as Nguyen drowned. Part 14. The Niece, the Snitches, and the Hospital Bed Sabotage and Salvation. In the mansion, life remained a tale of two cousins, the spoiled, arrogant Tan and the hard-working Bun. Jealous of Bun's talent, Tan sabotaged her by soaking her manuscripts in water. When Bun fought back, Dawn stepped in not to seek justice, but to beat Bun senseless for disrespecting her cousin. Bun lost her job over the ruined work, but her cousin Yue, the first wife's grandson, became her guardian angel. He helped her land a new job at his company. For a moment it seemed like Bun and her mother, Bai, finally had a ray of hope. Bun's first day at work went well until a small accident happened. She accidentally spilled water on a male colleague, Man, and tried to help him wipe it off. It was a harmless moment, but Dawn's circle of friends, a group of toxic socialites, were watching. They ran to Dawn with a twisted story about Bun's shameless behavior with a man. Dawn didn't confront Bun. Instead, she unleashed her fury on the defenseless mother, Bai. The assault was so brutal that Bai was rushed to the emergency room. Heartbroken by her grandmother's cruelty, Bun finds comfort in her aunt, Rin. While the two are out, a heavy sign suddenly breaks loose and falls toward a man on the street. Without hesitation, Rin lunges forward and saves him. In that split second as their eyes meet, a spark of romance is ignited. The man is caught and soon, the two are swept up in a whirlwind romance. However, Rin is haunted by her past divorce and fears her mother, Dawn, will sabotage the relationship. She only dares to whisper her secrets to the mute Bai. But in this house walls have ears. Dawn overhears everything. Expecting a storm of rage, Rin is shocked when Dawn reacts with gentleness. Dawn encourages her daughter to chase her happiness, whispering that finding true love is a rare blessing. But as always with Dawn, there is a double standard. While playing the supportive mother, Dawn is hunting for her own thrill. She sets her sights on a handsome young factory worker named Chai. She maneuvers herself into his path, and after a chance collision, the two begin a scandalous secret affair. Chai, however, is a bottom feeder. Using the money he drains from Dawn, he spends his nights in brothels. Eventually, his lifestyle catches up to him. He contracts a serious illness and passes it on to Dawn. At over 50 years old, Dawn's vanity and lust have invited a slow poison into her life, one that threatens to bring the entire family tree crashing down. Encouraged by her mother, Rin brings Kot home to discuss marriage. For a moment, the dark mansion is filled with light and joy. Even Dom, the chained son, is moved to tears. He is happy for his sister, but more importantly, he is finally allowed to step out into the sunlight. Though the world sees him as a monster, this flicker of family connection gives him the strength to fight his demons. But for Bai, the sight of Dom still triggers pure terror. She can only think of the beast that nearly killed her. Dom, now lucid, bows his head in shame, but when he looks up, he sees the radiant smile of his daughter, Bun. Her innocence is the only medicine that works on his fractured mind. After the wedding festivities, Dom finds the courage to approach Bai and apologize one last time. Bai is caught between pity and paralyzed fear. She wants to reach out, but her trauma is etched into her bones. As they stand in a tense standoff, a small hand reaches out between them. It's Bun. Bai pales, her maternal instincts screaming at her to protect her child from the monster. She shoves Dom back, standing as a human shield in front of her daughter. But little Bun, who has never known a father's warmth, doesn't run. She looks at Dom with tears in her eyes but a voice full of strength. She tells him she isn't afraid, that she believes her father would never hurt her. In that moment, love triumphs over illness. The walls Bai built for protection finally crumble. The three of them collapse into a tearful embrace, finally a real family. Even the cold-hearted Dawn is moved by the sight. But the peace is short-lived. Dawn's secret illness is a ticking time bomb, and the karma she has spent a lifetime running from is finally knocking at the door. Flush with Dawn's money, the young lover, Chai, becomes arrogant and starts bossing around the old blacksmith. Fearing he's been replaced, confronts Dawn. During their heated argument, a soul-shattering truth comes out. Dom is actually Dot's biological son. Dot is horrified, realizing that Dawn had lied years ago about aborting the child. Dawn coldly admits she tried to end the pregnancy but failed, and her failed attempts are exactly why Dom was born with his neurological disorder. Knowing the monster in the chains is his own flesh and blood changes instantly. He begins visiting Dom in secret, his heart heavy with a guilt he can't name. Dot's protective instincts turn deadly when he finds Chai and Dawn in a struggle. Overcome by jealousy and the realization that Dawn has been playing him for a fool, Dot snaps. He draws a dagger and brutally murders Chai. Rat, the good son, witnesses the entire crime. When he demands answers, Dot spills everything, exposing Dawn's decades of lies, affairs, and manipulation. Dawn arrives just in time to hear her life's work crumble. Faced with her son's disgusted gaze, Dawn faints from pure shame. Dot flees into the night, leaving a bloodstained Rat standing alone. When Dawn wakes up in the hospital, she finds that Rat has vanished without a trace, unable to live with the truth about his mother. While grieving for her lost son, Dawn goes to a temple with her son-in-law, Kot, Rin's husband. After an accident sends them both into a river, Kot's noble facade begins to slip. Seeing the aging but still beautiful Dawn in her wet clothes, Kot develops a dark, predatory interest. Taking advantage of Dawn's grief and intoxication, Kot lures her into a motel and crosses the ultimate line. Dawn is consumed by regret, but Kot isn't finished. He continues to pursue her. Dawn tries to buy her way out of the mess by giving Rin and Kot a piece of land to move away, hoping to end the affair. But karma has already taken hold. Rin goes for a medical checkup and receives a devastating diagnosis. She has contracted an STD. A parting gift from Chai to Dawn to Kot and finally to Rin. Rin suspects Kot and waits for him to return home to confront him. But when Kot arrives, he finds a drunken Dawn instead. He carries her inside and once again, the two give in to their forbidden lust. Rin, looking for her husband, walks in on the horrific sight of her husband and her mother together. Her world shatters. The betrayal is too deep, the trauma too great. The next morning, a blood-curdling scream echoes through the mansion. Rin is dead. The house of cards has finally collapsed. Bun delivers the news to her father Dom, whose fragile mind breaks completely at the news of his sister's death. While the family is in mourning, Rat's wife, Nong, is secretly celebrating, thinking that with one less heir, she'll get a bigger slice of the inheritance. Her greed boils over at the funeral, where she starts a screaming match with Don over money. The noise triggers Dom. He loses control in the middle of the service, and the funeral descends into a violent riot. In the chaos, Rin's coffin is knocked over. The nightmare didn't end with Rin's death. A few days later, a shattered cot delivered a letter to the household. As Dawn read her daughter's final words, the horrific truth came to light. Rin had known about the affair. She hadn't died out of spite. She had sacrificed herself, hoping her death would allow her mother and husband to be together without the world's judgment. This revelation crushed Dawn. The family she had manipulated so carefully was now a graveyard of broken souls. The wake-up call driven by unbearable guilt, Dawn took a chair to the spot where her daughter died, intending to end her own life. But fate wasn't finished with her yet. She was pulled back from the brink just in time. To force Dawn back to reality, the mute Bai did something unthinkable. She delivered a stinging slap across Dawn's face. It wasn't an act of revenge, it was a desperate wake-up call. The slap worked. Dawn realized that if she died now, her remaining children, especially the fragile Dom, would be left alone. For the first time, Dawn chose to live not for power or money, but out of a raw maternal instinct to atone for her sins. The rotting truth, but more bad news was coming. Chai, the young lover who had vanished after Rat paid him off, returned. He had squandered the money on failed treatments and was now a walking corpse, covered in the sores of the disease he had passed to Dawn. Dawn, terrified, rushed to the hospital for her own tests. The result was a death sentence. She had tested positive for a shameful terminal illness. The secret leaks. Dawn tried to hide her condition, self-medicating in secret with Bai's help. But Bua, her nosy head maid, noticed their strange behavior. While snooping, Bua overheard a sobbing Dawn admit that this illness was her divine retribution for a lifetime of evil deeds. Bua was so horrified she screamed the news to the entire house. The secret was out. When Nong, Rat's greedy wife, heard the news, she didn't feel pity. She felt triumph. She immediately told her parents, hoping Dawn would die quickly so she could snatch up Rin's share of the inheritance. One by one, the servants fled the plague house, leaving Dawn alone. The only one left in the end, only Bai and her daughter stayed. The irony was poetic. The woman Dawn had bought like a slave and treated like garbage was the only person willing to clean her wounds and feed her. Having tasted the coldness of the world, Dawn finally realized that Bai's silent heart was the only pure thing she had left. The prodigal son returns just as Dawn was reaching her end. The sound of shattering glass echoed through the hall. Bai had dropped a tray in shock. Rat had returned. Rat had been living in a monastery, but his master had told him he needed to settle his worldly affairs before he could truly commit to the monkhood. When he saw his mother, Dawn confessed everything, her crimes, her affair, and the fact that she was dying. Knowing her time is short, Dawn makes her final move. She drafts a will leaving her late daughter Rin's massive inheritance to Bai. But the ink isn't even dry before the mansion turns into a battlefield. Nong, Rat's greedy wife, loses her mind. She launches a physical attack on Bai, screaming at the top of her lungs about the unfairness of it all. Her venom isn't just about money. She spits insults at everyone, calling Bai just as shameless as her mother-in-law and accusing Bun of having a forbidden affair with her cousin, Yue. Rat, pushed to his limit, nearly spills the secret of Dom's true parentage. But unable to handle the toxic chaos, Rat does what he does best. He washes his hands of the mess and disappears again, leaving the family to rot in their own drama. Nong's greed finally catches up to her. In a blind rage, she storms up the stairs, trips, and takes a horrific fall. The head injury leaves her permanently brain-damaged and insane. She no longer remembers her name or the money she so desperately craved. Looking at her broken daughter-in-law, Dawn can only whisper one word: karma. The pariah's tale facing her own mortality, Dawn finally opens up to Bai. She tells her life story, from being sold into the mansion as a servant, to having her heart broken by Tun, to becoming a mistress just to survive. She admits that once she tasted power, she became obsessed with finding the love she was denied, only to realize that every man she ever bought never truly loved her. The woman who was once the most feared queen in the city is now a social pariah, an outcast that everyone avoids like the plague. Dawn receives a final letter from her son-in-law, Kot. She goes to find him and discovers a living nightmare. Kot is a walking corpse, his body ravaged by the terminal illness he caught from her. Kot blames her for destroying his life and Rin's. He pulls a gun on her and Dawn, drowning in guilt, closes her eyes and accepts her fate. Bang! But the bullet isn't for her. Kot chooses to end his own misery, his blood splattering across Dawn's face. He is finally free, but Dawn is left with the crushing weight of 2 more deaths on her soul. Public humiliation. The secrets are officially out. Bua, the former maid, makes a scene at the market, screaming to the world about Dawn's shameful disease. The news travels like wildfire, reaching Dawn's frenemies, the fake socialites who used to kiss her feet. They gleefully run to Madame Nu with the gossip. Madame Nu, fueled by decades of hatred, rushes to the mansion to deliver one final venomous sermon. She mocks Dawn's trashy lifestyle and tells her that this agonizing death is exactly what she deserves. But there is one more threat lurking in the shadows. The blacksmith and fugitive murderer is exhausted from being on the run. His only motivation to keep going is the knowledge that Dom is his son. He is done running. He's coming back to the mansion, determined to take his son away from Dawn's crumbling empire, no matter the cost. The blacksmith finally corners Dom and drops the ultimate bombshell. "I am your real father." Dom reacts with pure fury, refusing to believe that the master wasn't his dad. But Dot is relentless. He explains the horrific truth. Dom is mentally unstable because Dawn tried to erase him with drugs while he was still in the womb. Shattering his shackles in a moment of superhuman rage, Dom tries to strangle Dot. Dot flees and eventually, manages to calm Dom down with buckets of cold water. But the damage is done. Dawn's darkest secret has been ripped open in front of everyone. In a fit of desperation, Dawn knocks Dot unconscious with a stone. Dom, shattered by the realization that he was an unwanted child, wanders into the night, broken and lost. While searching for her son, Dawn runs into her toxic circle of socialite friends. Seeing her weakened and disgraced, they finally drop their masks and pelt her with insults and cruelty. The queen of the mansion collapses in the street, but even as she lies unconscious, the mob continues to jeer. Surprisingly, it is Dom who emerges from the crowd to protect her. Knowing his mother is dying, he chooses to forgive the woman who once tried to end his life. Meanwhile, karma finally catches up with Dot. While on the run and fueled by alcohol, the master blacksmith dies in a freak accident, impaled by a pile of wood. The man who lived by the forge died by the very materials he worked with. Dawn knows her time is up. Her old flame, Tun, visits her and encourages her to keep fighting, but Dawn is ready to go. She has one last mission: to secure happiness for her granddaughter Bun. Dawn confesses the truth to everyone. Because Dom is Dot's son, Bun and Yue are not blood-related cousins. They are free to love each other. Dawn swallows her pride and begs the first wife, Madame Nu, for her blessing. Seeing the shell of the woman she once hated, Madame Nu finally lets go of her bitterness and sighs. "I accept." As the end nears, Dawn's mind begins to wander. She sees the ghosts of the master, her daughter Rin, and her son-in-law Kot. She falls into a state of madness, and everyone prepares for the end. But in a final moment of lucidity, she gasps for her eldest son, Rat. Tun brings him to her bedside. As a monk, Rat begins to chant, his voice guiding his mother toward peace. Surrounded by the family she almost destroyed but eventually saved, Dawn takes her final breath. With the hate and secrets gone, the mansion finally finds peace. Bun and Yue are married, reuniting the two sides of the family. Rat returns to his life as a monk, and Dom, no longer haunted by the past, finds a calm, simple life with Bai. The War of the Wives is over, and a new generation begins a life of happiness, free from the shadows of the past. That concludes our story. If you enjoyed this dramatic journey, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss our next exciting recap.